Rochelle, lots of activity behind me here in Winnsboro, South Carolina. It's the end of the working day. At this factory, you can see the employees making their way home. But for how much longer are they going to perform this daily ritual at this site? We talk about the global tariffs war and trade war in fairly abstract terms in terms of dollar numbers and so on. But for the people here in this community, this trade war is starting to have very tangible outcomes.
At Element, we're proud to bring manufacturing back to America. And here in Winnsboro, South Carolina, it's a community effort.
But not for much longer. In October, Element Electronics plans to all but close, laying off 126 employees and maintaining just a skeleton staff. It can't afford to assemble TVs at this site because Donald Trump's tariffs have made imported Chinese components too expensive. Workers were told to stay tight-lipped.
What do you think about it all?
It is what it is.
But the region's Chamber of Commerce was stunned by the decision.
We knew the tariffs were in place. We had no idea that Winnsboro, South Carolina, was going to feel the detrimental impact of that so quickly. It was a shock.
While US unemployment is at record lows, in this region, it's nearly double the national average.
Winnsboro has suffered economically in the past few years. This textile mill operated for more than a century before it shut down last year with the loss of 240 jobs. And that was after Walmart, another large employer, also pulled out. The conflict between the US and China is hitting the bottom line elsewhere in South Carolina. China's retaliatory tariffs on US exports include BMWs built in Spartanburg. Element is trying to persuade the Trump administration to waive tariffs so it can maintain operations, though it's easy to find support for the president's combative trade policy.
It's like any change, there is detriment to begin with. But I do think that in the long run, we are going to see a stabilization, which is going to be good for American business.
But these workers don't have the time or money to stake their immediate futures on the outcome of an escalating global trade war.
Well, Rochelle, you can see the last of the workers today heading home. But come October, will that car park be empty for good if this factory is shuttered as a result of this trade war? One way that business leaders here in Winnsboro are trying to mitigate this is trying to get some kind of waiver that I mentioned there. And that would essentially be arguing with the US government that they can't source those components anywhere else. They have to be sourced from China, and therefore they have to do business with China. It's a similar kind of argument that GM has used with its own cars made in China being shipped to the United States and tariffed. But of course, there's a cruel irony in all of this. South Carolina favored President Trump very, very heavily in the US presidential elections 2 years ago. And it's a cruel irony that it's likely that some of the people in this factory voted for a president and are potentially now inadvertently voting themselves out of a job. The test for that, of course, will come during the midterm elections when we'll see if voters decide to punish President Trump for this trade war. But it has to be said, across the United States, we've seen similar factories, similar businesses under threat from these tariffs. Most voters in those places still back President Trump on his trade policy. Rochelle.